episode 297, Living Mulches. This is the Change Underground. I'm your host, John Moore. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Seems like the after effects of this COVID may still be lingering a bit, so if the voice is a bit off this week, I do apologise. But this week we're going to dive more deeply into a living food production approach, living mulches. Living mulches have been a thing for a long time, and using them requires a slight shift in emphasis and approach. It's not always worth the effort, apparently. In an article from the University of Wisconsin-Madison entitled Living Mulch Suppresses Weeds and Yields in Organic Vegetable Plots, researchers at UW-Madison tested living mulches for use in the production of 3 organic vegetable crops to evaluate their impact on weed suppression, labour needs, and crop yield and quality. The results demonstrated that while the living mulches did appear to suppress weed population, they also resulted in lower vegetable yields. The living plots in the study also had higher labour requirements than the control plots. End quote. Now this is instructive. I'm in the process of setting up a living mulch garden for blue corn production next summer. We're in the last month of autumn at present, and it's been a strange, very dry autumn for this part of the world this year. From the reading I've done, a 10 centimetre strip through a field of clover on 1 to 1.2 metre centres does not appear to reduce yield or raise labour costs, but then again blue corn, a maize variety, is hardly a typical vegetable crop. The varieties planted in the paper cited were snap beans, capsicum and broccoli. I can understand the beans not benefiting especially from a leguminous living mulch. They're already legumes. The capsicum and the broccoli required some thought. The growth habit of the maize plant is different from that of those vegetables, I guess. What happens with the maize is this: it gets away nicely before the clover can overgrow the cultivated or sprayed 10 centimetre strip. As the maize grows, it shades out more of the clover dies releasing its nitrogen, and the maize kicks again, and so on. Once the maize is harvested, sufficient remnants of the clover remain to quickly cover the soil again after the stover has been removed, either mechanically or by grazing. A quick check of the paper cited above reveals, quote, researchers recorded the living mulch stand density 4 weeks after seeding and clipped the mulches prior to vegetable planting in early June. There was no clean cultivation around the vegetable plants in the living mulch, end quote. And there you have it. By not giving the capsicum and the broccoli as transplants a bit of breathing room to be established, they were competing with the living mulch, rather than making use of soil biota to care for each other's roots. Added to this was the process of pushing a lawnmower over the mulch between the plant rows between 4 and 6 times during the season. And the living mulch used was also a bit of a puzzle. Buckwheat, field peas, crimson clover and medium red clover. I can understand the idea of diversity, but cut buckwheat will not grow back very much. Field peas are an aggressive cultivar, and the clovers, whilst annual, should have been sufficient on their own. I think from what I can see in the article and other pieces I've read on the maize, for instance, that this particular form of living mulch is not well suited to those vegetables. The experimental design called for way too much interference in the system by humans, and the experiment ran for just 2 years. I would have thought a build-up of material from continually mowing would have improved soil organic matter, but it turns out that these test plots were ploughed each spring to restart the measured process from the same bare soil starting point. And this tells us we need a longer-term test for these things, and that I should try some broccoli transplants into narrow, minimally cultivated strips in a white clover living mulch, just to see. Another case of mess about and find out, that is the scientific method. The other lesson is to read the whole article, to think critically about both the article and the methodology used in the reported results before incorporating them into our own use. Now, before I receive any backlash from people, I need to come clean. I have a confession. I've said my reading throughout this episode, but that's not exactly truthful. I've spent much time watching YouTube videos. The very thing that can lead to bizarre statements from the untrained. But let me be clear. The videos I've relied upon to make the decision to grow a mixed variety of white clovers have been from tertiary educational institutions. A white clover living mulch is a thing also recommended by Nasanobu Fukuoka, who hasn't sent me astray yet. So I'm secure in stating this path is one backed by evidence-based research. It's why the title of the cited article had me puzzled. It seemed in direct contradiction to everything I'd read or viewed. And as you can see, I hope from the above, the system used in the methodology is sufficiently different from a clover-based system to explain the differences. Confession over. All that being said, I have another article from an amateur, so to speak, entitled 6 Reasons Why I Chose Clover as a Living Mulch by Kane Jamison, links in the show notes. Quote, 1. Less weeding. 2. Retains moisture. 3. Withstands traffic. 4. Nitrogen fixer. 5. Improves soil tilth. And 6. Attracts pollinators. End quote. Which are 6 pretty good reasons to try the idea. I'll also be using rabbit tractors followed by chicken tractors, at least on the borders of the areas I'm sowing to clovers. I'm even contemplating setting aside a portion aside, say 300 square metres, to see if the living mulch could work as the basis for a larger rabbit chicken enterprise on the site. The results won't be in for 12 months or so, but I'll let you know how it goes. And as I mentioned in last week's episode, The Great Dying, link in the show notes, I think we are in dire strife in regards to greenhouse gases. And I think, and much of my reading seems to confirm, that a multi-layered, continually growing vegetative soil covering will actually draw down more carbon than a set of single species rotated garden beds. These, though, if grown organically, are better than a chemically doused similar system. It's all about getting to the point where we can make the biggest impact we can and produce as much food as possible from as small an area as possible in a sustainable way. If we can produce the same amount of food from half the space by species stacking, then we leave more space for a wilder form of nature. We all need to get into this. We can start where we are and begin with what we have on hand. Plant, and then plant some more. So if you're not yet growing and would like some guidance, the discount's still on over at the No Dig Garden course at World Organic News. It's still currently selling for $17, not the usual $149, until the world starts to return to a little bit more normality and food prices relax. But by then we'll all be growing our own, so it won't be a problem. So if you've been put off in the past, now's the time to jump in and learn. If you know anyone who would be interested, and the more people we can get growing, the better, please let them know. I have a link in the show notes where you can go to worldorganicnews.com and click on the courses tab. Please spread the word. We need to get as much food happening as possible, as close to the people eating it as we can. The best time to move from consumption to production was probably 50 years ago. The second best time is now. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week.